Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And as always, we'll start with a little bit of news. So we don't have any development news this week for EVE Online, but we are getting a special PvP event that should actually be starting a couple of hours after this EVE Talk comes out. So around 1800 EVE time, and the start should be in Jita itself as well. With I think it's mostly Spectre Fleet organizing, but other PvP groups are doing the same. And if you want to participate, if I'm not mistaken, they're even giving out PvP ships for you to join the fleets. And I think that's the plan there, to do some sort of a fleet action when it comes to this event that's being organized. So it could be pretty cool, should be streamed as well. And then I'll quickly mention this. This is actually take 2 for EVE Talk, and you may notice some of this that'll be mentioned in the chat up there. We just had like a market crash or a total market freeze for like 5 minutes. So I am hoping that the recording will be able to continue this time. But yeah, other than that, not a lot of development news for EVE Online at the moment. Hopefully CCP comes out with some cool stuff pretty soon, like those keys. I think a lot of players are waiting for those nullsec keys for the reserve banks there. Could be very interesting, I think, for players that want to rob the banks, and also pretty interesting for the market itself. Next up, let's take a quick look at the New Eden store. I did check it just a moment ago, so we just have some bundles front and center. The new Ultraviolence Vortex skins are still marked as new, and then in the services we have nothing on sale at the moment. That means that we get to move on to the market itself at around 1:55. No, let's call it 2 minutes. 2:00 for some plex and stuff, and let's dive right in. You may already have seen it from the ticker as well. Sell prices in Jita itself are up just a little bit, and if you look at the price chart here, it's still hesitating. We get some data points for the daily averages below the chart, but most of them are above there, and you can very clearly see that we are testing that 2.4 million average price at the moment. For Jita itself, sellers are already above 2.5 million, buyers just below 2.4. So here we have a little bit more of a spread. Then if we go to the player owned trade hubs, we're just below 2.5 million. And we actually go up in buy prices as well to just below 2.4 million ISK. So it's definitely a little bit of testing that's still happening for Plex, but I'm reading especially the sell prices in Jita for itself going up like this as upwards pressure at the moment. What's quite noticeable as well is that the volumes are down a little bit for Plex as that upwards pressure is starting to build. So we're probably getting a little bit lower supply at the moment. And I mean, I already noticed a couple of posts on Reddit as well. This is, definitely like a yearly tradition at this point to notify us that active players are dropping on the servers. I'm not too panicked myself. I do think that it's a seasonal thing for EVE Online. That's probably exacerbated by, the vaccination campaigns in real life that are happening, and some of the restrictions in especially a lot of the Western world at the moment that do seem to be easing. Here in Belgium, we are definitely starting to, hope for the end of the tunnel. Let's hope it's not a fake, but that's basically what's happening. So I think all of that is contributing to some lower activity in EVE Online, and thus a little bit lower demand perhaps, but especially supply for Plex at the moment. Next up, we have the multiple pilot train certificate, and this is where the market froze on take 1. So let's see what's happening here. Well, 5-day moving average trying to get back up there as well. 20-day moving average flattening out, and here this with those daily averages above below, you are getting this different picture where the market is clearly hesitating to take the training certificates in any direction. Sellers are coming in just above 1.2 billion, buyers are coming in just below 1.2 billion. Also another one of these, holding pattern aspects that we see quite often when both of these guys come together. That really does mean that no one really knows which direction to go at the moment. After that, we have the skill extractors that we take a look at, following the plex chart very closely. Here we even have daily average prices that are right on top of the chart, but today's one is just a little bit above that. So we are talking about 280 million ISK for the sellers, 276 million for the buyers as well. Again here, super narrow margin, definitely still a lot of hesitation in the market, with on my end at least, I'm probably seeing a little bit of upwards pressure that's dominating, but it's really on a knife's edge. It could go in either direction. We have to be honest about that. I think a lot of it will depend from CCP announcements that they can still make for this current quadrant, especially those bank reserve keys. I do think that they could have a big impact on the market once CCP actually announces what it's all about, how you get them, and it's a lot of risk that's still floating out there. Next up, the injector market. Then here are the large scale injectors that are continuing their descent quite heavily. So this is probably why we are starting to see some posts on the subreddit for EVE Online about the skill point farmers. At this point, I think they may be looking at quite a lot of pressure on their margins. 592 million for the sellers, 580 for the buyers, and then it goes down to 560 very, very quickly. So still a lot of pressure on these large scale injectors. I'm going to say that this is that hesitation in the plex market, and then combined with the very generous skill point offerings. We still have a skilling spree going on at the moment. Basically, you undock, shoot a rat, get some skill points, sometimes shoot 5 of them, get some more. So it's really easy to get that skill point train going, and to maintain that, it really doesn't take a lot of effort. And as a result, I do think that a lot of players are like, well, there's nothing super special on the horizon either, so skill injectors not exactly in high demand at the moment. This is a 1 year low, and well below that 600 million mark that had some resistance before. These small scale injectors should not be able to buckle that trend, and they do not. Slowly going down towards 120 million ISK. In fact, sellers already below that at 119, and buyers are at 113 million ISK here. A little bit more margin, as we have a clear trend at the moment. It is more pressure on the skill injectors, at least the regular ones. Let's see what the daily alpha injector is doing. Yeah, a little bit of a counter move. This one is definitely a little bit different. I can definitely understand this as well. Once activity starts to drop a little bit, well, there's probably a certain segment of the player base that decides that, I'll lapse my monthly sub, I'll just try to play as an alpha and play in a more casual way. But then the daily alpha injector probably becomes a more interesting prospect and something to actively work towards in a much more at a much more doable scale of around 40 to 50 million ISK. It's 43 million for the sellers and 38 millions for the buyers. So right around average, and a slight bit of a bounce here in the last week or so because of the sellers that are trying to get a couple of extra million, probably due to that demand. Volumes though not that high at the moment either, so we are starting to see that lower activity show up in the volumes of this segment. And then finally we've got the hypercores that are continuing to seesaw above 250,000 ISK volumes. A little bit of pressure on that one as well, although not as clear as some of the previous items. 260,000 for most sellers and 247,000 for the buyers. Next up, minerals, but I am going to drink a little bit. So we can keep going, and so we get minerals at 905. Like that. All right, let's take a look at what Tritanium is doing. So seeing a little bit more pressure after breaking through that 5 ISK barrier, but it is clearly slowing down as well, with the 20-day moving average starting to join in on the 5-day moving average. And on a couple of days we're seeing that downwards pressure show up, but overall we're pretty sideways at the current price trend of around 4.5 ISK, well, 4.65 for the sellers and 4.55 for the buyers. sellers, so still above 4.5 actually, but I think here is going to be, at the moment, we still probably have lower demand in general, and so any serious amounts of supply are going to compete within a certain boundary for the sell prices, and we could very much start to move in a 4.5 to 5, maybe even 5.5 ISK range for those sellers. And so that means that, yeah, deciding on the right time to sell your titanium can make a big difference. Then pyrite is buckling under the pressure, breaking through that 20 ISK barrier and looking for a new range. 18 ISK for the sellers and 17.90 for the buyers. So it looks like 18 is that new range, losing another 10% under, well, the current pressure, of course. And this could really be a combination, right? We're saying lower demand because of this bubble or this massive rush that happened in April, but combine that with lower activity, and this is probably what is starting to break down on the mineral market. Then we've got Mexalon, so I'm then expecting a little bit more pressure on this one as well, and yeah, there we go, 1 year low point for the Mexalon market, bringing us back below 75 ISK, 65 in fact for the first seller, a jump away, Ingita itself at 67 and just above 60 ISK for the buyers. So the cheapest Mexalon price in a year for the industry cycles in nullsec is here, and this is, as I've said, going to be that combination. You have this huge rush of demand that pushed the price up to 200 ISK a little bit over a month ago, so that was definitely going to have its consequence a little bit after the industry changes would hit, and now combine that with the summertime slowdown, and this is the result, of course. Bad news for the high-sec miners. I would say if you were to be mining, I would actually move away from the minerals and go for the compressed ores. I do still think that, having the ability to move large quantities effectively through the compressed ores is going to be the play at the moment, even though there should be pressure on all of that as well. But I would basically hold on to compressed ores and not to minerals at the moment. Then we've got the Isogen that is holding on to 50 ISK. This is definitely a little bit different from everything else, and I think another sign that my theory may be correct, that we're talking about reserves that are keeping the price in the current range, but once those are used up, we will see a completely different dynamic in Isogen, now that it has to be sourced from low-sec. So what we're seeing is 51 for the sellers and 45 ISK for the buyers, and we're still seeing big volumes, right? 25 million here, 50 million here, another 24 million here. This is basically what's keeping us within this current very narrow band, but while everything else is under pressure, what's not happening, or what doesn't seem to be possible, is that fresh supply comes in enough amount to really push this sell price lower to like well below 50 ISK or anything like that. If you look at what's happening in Mexalon, if you look at what's happening in pyrite, let's actually take the chart here, even pyrite just buckled, and then titanium, definitely a big correction. Isogen though is in this price band, and that is because it's reserves that are keeping us in check, but there's nothing else to really compete with those, and so they've got this, well, kind of a monopolistic position, but they probably also want to sell to liquidate some of that Isogen at the moment. So this is really a very different chart and a very different dynamic in Isogen. And so yeah, honestly, those holders of all of that Isogen, the more patience they have, I think, the better the chance that they would have to actually sell their Isogen at better prices later down the line. Once we get through these reserves and active supply will have to mesh with active demand, I do think we're going to see something potentially quite explosive, because the other mineral that is sourced from nullsec, Noxium, you can see this on the 1 year chart, over triple the price to 1500 ISK. A little bit of pressure, but that is normal. This is what you would expect when everything else is under pressure as well. You're seeing us go to just above 1500 for the sellers and 1400 for the buyers. So we're seeing a little bit of a gap here because, well, demand is dropping off, but the one that's just not moving is Isogen, and yeah, that to me is another sign that this is what's happening. Noxium found its way into the active supply demand situation, and that meant, well, if you get a good to low sec, it is very risky, so a lot harder to get. We're talking 1500 disc, the most expensive Tech 1 mineral at the moment, I think, so Isogen has, I think, a catch up to do once we get through the old reserves. Then we've got the Zydrine market that has stabilized just below 1000 ISK. 913 for the sellers in Jita, still just above 900 for most here in the Tranquility Trading Tower, but 800 ISK to the buyers. I think another margin that opens up as buyers drop off, showing that, you know, there's not that much demand for minerals out there at the moment. Then we have a Megasite that has made its way back above 600 and is able to defend that. Sellers are at 610, buyers at 580. A little bit more competition here for the Megasite market, much more narrow margin. Potentially, I would say that Megasite, is also in this weird spot where it should be a lot closer, historically speaking, to the Zydrine price, and it's been so much below that for such a long time that there is actually a little bit of competition happening here in the Megasite market. Maybe some old reserves, although it would honestly surprise me, but maybe this is still what's happening here as well. Overall, Megasite and Isogen able to hold on to their price range, while everything else that is, I would say, in active supply demand mechanics are seeing the pressure of lower demand. And then finally, we've got Morphite that is doing its counter move, going towards 100,000 disc, 10x on what I would call a price point where I would, historically start to buy Morphite. So this is getting really crazy. 92,000 disc for the sellers, 85,000 disc for the buyers, showing that Tech 2 is clearly, I think, the focus for the player base at the moment. So this may really be a consequence. I'm not sure if this is what CCP wanted or expected, but that the progression path for players, I would say in EVE Online, is going to be from small, easy to make ships like Tech 1 frigates, destroyers, and then cruisers. And maybe they'll go up into the battle cruisers, but then rather than going to battleships, carriers, super carriers, that becomes super complex to produce, they're just switching to Tech 2. Right, they're letting all of that, be done by other players. You still need to take one as a base, but Tech 2 is where the focus is. Apparently, that's my read on this super big counter move to Morphite here all of a sudden. Next up, we have the PI market coming in at 1730. Like that. Let's see what's happening here. Well, lower activity, lower demand. I would say that pressure is to be expected here as well. We had a little bit of a comeback on some of the advanced PI materials because, of course, the industry changes all of a sudden required PI materials for some of the bigger ships. But overall, I think the trend is going to be on pressure. And so we see that the broadcast nodes, for instance, lost a little bit of ground from 175 to 1.5 million on the chart, just above that for the sellers, and actually still above 1.5 for the buyers as well. So there is still some demand. There probably is still capital and super capital production out there. Of course, when it comes to nullsec, those big toys are important and very powerful weapons, but I do think that you won't see throwaway dreadnought fleets, throwaway carrier fleets as easily anymore. They'll be used in a much more judicious way, and it'll become a lot harder as well to topple the players that actually have them. Then we've got the construction blocks that are going back below 8,000 discs. So yeah, a little bit of a seesaw movement, clearly still below average. And at the moment, I think that some more pressure is building. 8,150 for the sellers and 7,300 for the buyers. And that does show that big gap in demand. Consumer electronics back down as well here. 7,250 on the chart. 6,800 for the sellers. 6,125 for the buyers. So this clearly shows that this supply, that's not what's being sold, considering this average price. No, mostly players are dumping their consumer electronics to the few that show demand for it, and that means just above 6,000 disc. Coolants are stabilizing above 8,000 disc. A little bit more fuel usage was definitely part of the of the industry changes as well, with more reactions and some fuels needed, I think, in some of the production cycles as well. So overall, 8,400 for the sellers and almost 8,000 disc for the buyers. Well, it's a comeback away from 5,000 disc, which is half the normal price. We're still settling around 20% below a normal coolant price, but this is a nice little comeback. Stabilizing here is great. Can we maintain that? Well, at least I'm seeing some volatility in fuel blocks, so maybe for the fuel-related PI materials that we can maintain our gains. The rest of them, though, I'm afraid that that pressure will continue. Cryoprotectant solutions still hovering at that 100,000 ISK range. A couple of sellers just below that in the Tranquility Trading Tower, and then buyers below 90,000 ISK. You know, we've been saying that for quite a while, but I would say, you know, try to buy these in small volumes at the very best prices. Does make sense. If CCP comes out with an implant set, all of a sudden you have your investment ready. Enriched uranium tied to fuel, so here we do have that come back a little bit, but nowhere near the normal price. This doesn't even show up on this chart anymore. 12.5 or something like that is actually a normal price for enriched uranium. It's a lot harder to make than coolants. It's going now for 9,400 ISK and buyers at 9k. So you still have that dynamic, right? Coolants easy to make on a gas planet. 8,000 seems to be that range. Enriched uranium much harder to make, so you get a premium for around 1,000 ISK, but it's stabilizing at a lower average price. The integrity response drones have a weird chart because of a data point, but tiny bit of pressure here at the tail end, I would say, on the chart. We are talking 1.8 million for the sellers to 1.6 for the buyers. It's still, I would say, respectable for advanced PI. Mechanical parts, if this one is the canary in the coal mine, then that does mean that the lack of demand could become just across the PI spectrum, and even for the fuel-related PI materials. This one also made its way back to 8k. I would say that historically speaking, coolants and mechanical parts very close together in how easy they're to make and thus in their price range. And as a result, this one losing out, going back down to 7,000 for the sellers and 6,700 for the buyers, is a bad sign for coolants. Then we've got nanites that are able to stay well above 5,000 ISK this week. 5.6 for the sellers, 5.1 for the buyers. But you can clearly see here again, this is all the demand in and around JITA. We are struggling with that low demand. That's potentially putting very quick pressure on the price on any new supply. Nano factories lost a little bit of ground, but actually making a slight comeback back to 900k. 840 for the sellers, 770 for the buyers. So interesting, a bit of a counter move here. Organic mortar applicators, all over the place. Basically, they're hesitating here and there. 800,000 for the sellers, 700,000 for the buyers. Pretty large margin as well. Recursive computing module, bad chart. 1.3 million for the sellers, 1.2. That's a narrow margin at a decent price. So that is interesting. Robotics, that's really bad. Back below 60k on the average prices. Just above that for the sellers, but 57,000 for the buyers. And so yeah, this is supply, right? Look at that. And then this is the demand. So that is still basically what's at play here. And it's mostly these buyers that are actually slagging up the robotics trades at the moment. Self-harmonizing power core, that's more in line with that expected pressure, heading back to 1.5 million. 1.6 for the sellers, buyers just above 1.5. Sterile conduits, very sharp drop off all of a sudden, back below a million. Yeah, a million for the sellers, 940 for the buyers. Very interesting how we are seeing this mixed picture for these advanced PI materials. Ducomi superconductors, bit of pressure at the tail ends. Buyers are at 62k. Same story, I would say, as for the cryoprotectant solutions. If you want to be ready for a implant announcement from CCP, we never know when or if that even comes, but when it does happen, buying the cheapest Ducomi superconductors is a good idea then. And then the wetware mainframes stabilizing at 1.5, 1.5 for the sellers. No, 1.7 in JITA, in fact. I should probably go like that. 1.7 million for, yeah, that's another one that hesitates. So this is interesting. At first it was very clear, pressure, lack of demand. But for the advanced PM materials, there is a mixed picture, with some of them holding on all of a sudden, some of them very wide ranges on these daily averages. Look at that. So this is very big, above 1.75 and just above 1.25. That's a huge range in a matter of 10 days. And so I would say that in all likeliness, this is because of what's happening in nullsec, because, well, there's probably players that are putting in the work to get all of those capitals and super capital production lines up and running. It's very important, going to become very important, I think, for potential dominance in nullsec to have the ability to do that despite all of its complexity. And so that's actually creating some volatility and some hesitation in the advanced PI materials markets. Next up, the advanced moon materials, 2520. Like that. All right, let's see. I think last week all the carbides shot up to close to 1 year high points, definitely very expensive. So here is crystalline carbonate for Galente Tech 2 production. A little bit of a drop off, but clearly still super expensive. 212 ISK for the sellers and 207 for the buyers as well. Very big gains that seem to be here to stay for now. So super expensive carbide materials. For the titanium carbide for Caldari, we're basically settling just below 300 ISK. 285 for the sellers, 268 for the buyers. Look at that margin narrowing as well. Much less of an oversupply situation here as well. So super expensive, still the case. Then we get Minmatar with Fernite carbide that jumped up to 300 ISK as well about a week ago. A little bit of a drop off. That's kind of normal, but we're still talking 240 ISK for the buyers. And again, look at this for the sellers, excuse me, and look at these buyers forced up to close that gap up to 220 ISK, and it's a decent amount of them. So this is potentially here to stay. Then we get tungsten carbide for Amar, the one that's hesitating a little bit more, 200 ISK for the sellers, but 196 for the buyers. That margin is gone as well. Potentially, I would say that this one could go up a little bit considering the price ranges of all of the others. But yeah, Amar maybe a little bit less popular at the moment for some reason, and the reason why you're getting that slight discount here. Let's see if this is finally having an impact on the metamaterials. Those have always still maintained around average prices in the last couple of weeks and even months. So we are talking photonic metamaterials for Galente. No, look at that. In fact, dropping off to 12,000 ISK towards a lower range as well. 12,000 for the sellers, 12,000 for the buyers though. There is enough demand, I think, to keep us from crashing, but you know, metamaterials, at least the photonic ones here so far, still quite affordable historically speaking. Then we've got the non-linear metamaterials for Caldari, seeing a little bit of pressure as well, basically settling at its average price for the year, 22,500, 400 for the sellers, 19,200 for the buyers. Bit of margin here, so a little bit of room for this one to have that pressure. Also a lot more expensive than the previous one, but yeah, it is Caldari, so that does seem to be the case at the moment. Caldari, most expensive, probably most popular. Galente, I think next. After that, we actually have Minmatar, I think, with a little bit of volatility, probably because of some meta stuff, with, like, for instance, the Imperium quite often, you know, being known to fly certain Tech 2 fleets. What's the ship? Let's see, I should have it here. The Munin, not sure if it's still part of the meta there, but it was definitely the case. I think that's like a PvP reason that Minmatar actually has some niche ships, and then Amar struggling the most. But yeah, non-linear metamaterials, a little bit of pressure on this one as well. Then we have plasmonic metamaterials for Minmatar, right? Same thing, going back below 20,000 ISK, 20,400 for the sellers, 19,260 for the buyers. A little bit of margin opening up, basically right on the average for the charts. And then we've got terahertz metamaterials for Amar. Also, tiny bit of pressure, just below 20k here. And man, pressure mounting very quickly. 19,200 for the sellers, 19,000 for the buyers. So the metamaterials are basically, I would say, still in regular cycles and at normal prices. The other advanced move materials, fermionic condensates, stable for the week, definitely at a pretty low price. I think we can go through these decently quickly unless we spot something very unique. Here ferrogel, for instance, also very stable at the week, able to maintain its gains at around 35,500. Buyers forced up to 34,800, so slightly better price here in ferrogel. Fullerite staying below 1,000 discs, so this is definitely also, you know, surprisingly flat for the week. Bit of pressure at the tail end. Hypersynaptic fibers just had a spike up to 13,000 disc, but this is, I think, what I was expecting last week, how that gap would be filled very quickly with the mono. So you can see in a matter of days it drops back below 11k, and now we're still struggling to stay above 10. Yeah, 9,962 for the sellers, so below 10,000 disc, and then the buyers are at 9,800. These gaps get filled very quickly here. Nano transistors, bit of down pressure on this one, staying below 5,000 disc. Phenolic composites, that one's all right, back to a 1-year high point all of a sudden. 2,120 for the sellers and almost 2,000 disc for the buyers. So this is a little bit different. Why? We're seeing this double top, right? We had this breakout above 2k about a month ago. Now we have a second one, and the buyers are feeling that pressure. So this is different. Phenolic composites is seeing higher demand and thus high prices. And then we get these ceramic fibers that are basically, you know, starting to move around that 500 disc pattern. I think both of these, phenolic composites and ceramic fibers, basically a little bit more need in the new industry changes, and so able to defend their gains a bit better than some of the others, like these hypersynaptic fibers that then drop off massively in a matter of days because of new supply. That's the situation in advanced move materials. Some of them have known gains with the industry changes, but you know, most of those, it's mostly just supply drying up that's driving the price up, and then all of a sudden, right, the opportunity is spotted and it gets filled very, very quickly. We've got the Tech 2 ships next at 31.30. Like that. Let's see if we have some more volatility or opportunities. So here's the basilisk. So that one dropped off very sharply, and so I have a basilisk that I bought including taxes for less than 200 million. Sellers are coming in now at 220 and buyers are still below 200 million. So I would say that my trade is still matchable at this point, or at least very close to that. And so yeah, once you see a drop off like this, at some point you have to make a decision, of course. Oh, I should probably keep the holdings open at this point. So we're waiting. Hopefully we can see another breakout. That would be very interesting. It is going to be maybe a little bit harder considering what's happening with the war. On the other hand, I would say lower activity will also impact supply. And you know, with the industry changes, I do think that a focus on subcapital ships could be coming back to warfare in general, and as a result, yeah, the basilisk or the volatility in some of these Tech 2 ships could actually still be there. Next up, we've got the Cerberus. That one is starting to look very interesting as well for potentially an investment. So we are talking a massive drop off. We went to 300 disc, 270 to 80 most of the time, I think. Sellers are still just below 250 million. Buyers are at 220. And this is the story that I've been talking about as we've seen the carbides move up in price, that the real question is going to be finding those new bottom prices. Are buyers at 220, I would say, or let's say below 220? Is that a price where if you buy a Cerberus, you're pretty much certain that you're gonna make ISK? So for this one, for me, yeah, I would hope that we can still get rid of these. And then once we start to play below 220, that's where I would consider making a move for the Cerberus. Unfortunately, you can see in the last 3 days, the daily average is going back up already. And so it may be that that's aiming too low, but we will see. Next up here, we've got the Guardian that you know, had a very nice April, May here as well, going up above 230 million. Bit of a drop off, but this is an MR ship, so be careful. I would say that the experience has been that volatility has been lacking in most of those. 204 million for the sellers, buyers already below 180 million, so already below this price point. that's definitely potentially something to look into as well. But a very, very big drop off here. Potentially this is the right time to still snag one though. Maybe a quick trip and an aggressive buy order on a Guardian could be in the books. Then we've got the hounds. So I did not sell my hounds. I'm still holding on to those that I bought for less than 25 million ISK, but I could have sold at a bit of a profit last week. And you can see that the volatility is back though. Very sharp drop off back to 25 million on the average prices, 26 million for the sellers, 23 million for the buyers. And so my sell opportunity, that was like 33 million or something like that, I think, or 32, over in a matter of a couple of days. Well, you can also see that just, a dozen ships could bring us right back on that. And so this is the dynamic that I was talking about. We're probably seeing lower activity, but also potentially that lower supply, where the supply itself has a big impact. You can see how aggressive all of these sellers are, 33, 29, 28, 26, very aggressive selling here in these hounds, but that potentially creates that volatility that we're looking for trading. So yeah, at the moment, unfortunately, if these were gone, you could have really made a much better deal than me. Try to buy as close as possible to 20 million ISK, but this is still, I would say, the discovery phase for Tech 2. What are these bottom prices? How low can they go on oversupply? And it's very difficult to see at the moment, but the hound definitely back under pressure very, very quickly with just a dozen ships. Ichthyrsa, to keep an eye on the Triglavian, still very expensive, just below 900 million on average, 900 to 914 million for the sellers, 820 for the buyers, basically super expensive. The Ishtar is starting to normalize, also having that double top and that very strong April-May, where it went for over 250 million ISK, 233 million now for the sellers, 221 for the buyers. Again, looking for that jumping point, very difficult to find that at the moment, of course. Then we've got the Manticore bouncing off of 30 million. So I would say around 5-6 days ago, you would have had a nice opportunity well below 30 million. Now 33 million for the sellers, buyers coming in at just below 30 million ISK. And yeah, it's that same discovery, right? Before, this was pretty easy. Buyers well below 25, the chart hits 25. These are good times to buy, but then things start to move all over the place. We play with 20 million a couple of times, and then we managed to get 25 twice, but now looks like 30 million and below 30 million may be the right buy prices. It is very difficult to say. This is Caldari, so maybe it's like the Caldari premium that we're seeing in the advanced movements that is causing this, but we have to do our homework here, be pretty careful when it comes to these investments. I mean, I've got one Basilisk, one Svepel, two Svepels I think, and then 4 hounds I think, or maybe it's even just 2 hounds at this price point. So I'm definitely not throwing billions of ISK in a single trade at these Tech 2 ships at the moment. It's just too unpredictable. You never know when you're getting from this situation where, oh, I managed to buy below 25 million and now all of a sudden it's really struggling to get back below 30 million. So it's very difficult. Then we get the Munin, which is dropping off after reaching close to 1 year high point, except for this one war peak here, went to 300 million ISK, falling back a little bit to 280 for the sellers and 240 for the buyers. Now, if you've managed to buy before the rush, you could say here in March, you're still looking at a very nice profit. But this is definitely the story in some of these ships, and especially in the Amar ships, I'm going to say you're lacking in that sharp volatility, which for instance for the Hound here, right, that's tradable. This was actually tradable. Now you can buy. Maybe we have another move for the Basilisk, right? This is volatile. That's where you can, try to make a move on that. And so is this increase, in fact, right? These two. First opportunity, second opportunity, that's really nice, but some of these Minmatar and especially the Amar ships are lacking that. And then you're looking at multi-month trades where you're trying to catch a trend, which can definitely depend on some knowledge from Nullsec, like here for the Munin. Then we've got the Nemesis, and this is what we don't want to see, right? Before here, buy below 22.5, very nice opportunity. Look at that volatility shooting up to 30 million. Perfect. This is what you want to see for trading. But now, we didn't get really, we managed to get just to 25 million, and now we're basically flat in that zone between 25 and 27. So it's 27 for the sellers and 24 million for the buyers. Does this mean that you can, you know, make a good deal buying below 25 million? Well, I'm not sure. Just drop a couple, we're below 24, a couple more will be below 23. So it's very difficult, as I've said, as I've been saying here, for the take-to-ship market. It does feel a little bit like gambling sometimes. And so what I'm definitely looking for is decently sharp or maintained drop-offs, right? This was like a month straight down from well above 30 million, and then we could buy below 25 million. That felt like an opportunity. The Basilisk, that's a very, very big drop-off, bought below 200 million. Looking at this chart makes a lot of sense for me. So this is what I'm mostly looking for in the take-to-ship market at the moment. The Oneros, a little bit of a drop-off, but also after spiking to one-year high point, stabilizing at 200 million, 200 for the sellers, 186 for the buyers. And it's that same thing, right? Before, below 150, yeah, definitely that looks low. That's where you want to buy. Does that mean that this is high? It's very difficult to say. Here is the Panther for our battleships, also stabilizing, I would say. So production costs themselves may not be rising that much anymore. Almost 1.4 billion for the sellers, buyers at 1.2. So they're basically forced to pay those higher prices. Then we get the Purifier for Amar. This is again what I was mentioning, that slower trend. You get some tradable volatility going below 25 and then reaching 35 here in a matter of 10 days is very nice. But what you can try to do here though is buy low and then hold on for 5 months. So you could have bought here for around 22, 23 million for several weeks at a time, and then if you have the patience right now, you're still selling these purifiers at 33 million a piece with buyers above 30 million. Is definitely a different dynamic from that Twitch trading, which here at the beginning of the chart you've got some very nice examples of. The Scimitar is also flattening out at a pretty high level, causing more confusion, I would say. 230 for the sellers, 205 for the buyers. The Widow is staying very expensive as well. 1.5 billion for the sellers, 1.4 for the buyers, showing that Caldari production super expensive. And then finally we get the Zealot for Amar, where again here, right, massive drop off. Unfortunately, that's where the volatility ended, but you do have these trades, these trend trades, you could say, 2 months later, going from 180 to 250 million. At the moment, a little bit of a downtrend, but yeah, 236 for the sellers, 215 for the buyers. Definitely not, all right, I'm gonna buy one and then next week potentially I can sell it at a profit. That's not happening in all these ships anymore at the moment. Moving on to the Tech 3 ship market, coming in at 42.15. Like that. Let's take a look at these. So here's the Confessor, and the bad news continues for my investment. I thought we could dry up a little bit, and so a cheap Zwepel at 41 was a good idea, but continued pressure, slow pressure on the price of the Confessor, pulling us further down below 50 million on the chart. 45 for the sellers, 41 for the buyers, and supply is still looking decently high, maybe a touch above what is needed, and that seems to be why we're dropping off from 50 million towards 45 million now for the sellers. Hecate showing that same pattern, continuing to pull away from 50 million as well. 48 million now for the sellers and 43 million for the buyers. Supply wise here, that's a lot, right? Last 2-3 days, 36 here, quite a few sell orders. So this again is pushing us to slightly lower prices for these tactical destroyers. And then we've got the Jackdaw, that's actually decently flat. 48, yeah, 47.5 for one, 49 million for most sellers. Supply wise, this is drying up a little bit. All right, so we are going to probably get a couple of extra Jackdaws in here. Unfortunately, that does mean that they could drop the price off to 46, and I think there's plenty of supplies in the Hecate and the Confessor to not make that any bit of a problem. And 46 for the sellers, and that unfortunately will mean that the Zwepel is not moving above that 45 million range, which is what I was kind of hoping for with my purchase. 46 million almost for the sellers, 41 million for the buyer. So it's still an okay purchase. I could make a little bit of profit if I try to sell right now, but it's not the trend that I was hoping for. Basically, generally, we've got a little bit more supply in these tactical destroyers than what we needed. Which is, well, before, you can see here in the months before though, we were clearly able to maintain that 47, 48 sell price, and then on any disruption we shot up to 50, 60 million. And if that were to happen, then that Zweepel at 41 million, if it can be dragged up on one of these events, that would have been an interesting thing to happen. But at the moment, yeah, just a little bit too much supply, and so my margins are slowly degrading for that Zweepel investment. Well, I'm definitely not right all the time. In fact, a lot of my trades don't work out. It is still a little bit of gambling. And then we get the cruisers. Here is the Legion chart, basically continuously bouncing off of that 180 million price range. First sellers coming in below that, 167 for the buyers. It's going to be interesting to see if we can break through this on the chart. But other than that, yeah, this is like at the high end of the range for this 1 year chart, so I would not be buying at the moment. Then we've got the Loki. That's a little bit more interesting, a bit more volatility, and a pretty sharp drop off, just breaking through that 180 barrier. 167 for the sellers, 158 for the buyers. I would say that it's still a little bit too early, but yeah, this potentially is buying below 160. You can see here 1, 2, twice before this has been actually a resistance point. So you could buy, I would say never buy more than one, but buying one Loki hull now below 160 could be an interesting thing to look at. Then the Proteus actually double spike up to 200 million ISK and coming back down from that. 178 for the sellers, 165 for the buyers. Definitely too high in the range to make a move, in my opinion. And then the Tengu is nicely sitting down on the 180 million mark. First seller below that again here as well. 168 for the buyers. Same story as with the Legion for me. This is not where I would make a jump in. I would prefer to see something like this then, where we're clearly breaking the trend. We're on the downside of this, and we could now play with the bounce like what we've seen here and here. So yeah, that's really it. If you would want to take a gamble on Tick 3 at the moment, it would actually be a Loki, but be careful, that does feel like gambling. And then we got the final segment, the extra product for the week. We're going to go back to a classic faction, battleships, at 46, let's say 47 minutes. Like that. So we're looking for ships, battleships, faction battleships. Let's start with the pirate battleships as always. So these are the industry changes coming in late April. Should price goes up from 120 to above 150 million, and the bargain is still billion. The bargain is still going for 1.5 billion ISK. Buyers coming in above 1.3. So this is definitely, you know, the storm of mineral prices going up, and then now the industry changes that have I think made it a lot harder to make these ships. Then we've got the Macariel, much faster response, right? The Barg is a little bit harder, I think, to get the BPCs. Macariel, I think, a very specific part of space can yield a lot of these, and so you've got this immediate response to all of these changes from the market, pushing the price from 500 million up to above 700 million. We're selling for 750, buyers coming in at 687. It is that big premium. Yeah, battleships have become more expensive. They're basically, this is a difference with that industry has done, right? It's a new tier where before everything up to battleships was basically, I think, considered one, Tech 1 was basically considered one big pool, and then the pirate faction battleships were actually, alright, more expensive, but nothing too crazy. And now, you know, up to cruisers is one segment, and then up to battleships is another segment, and it's a big jump all of a sudden. And that's what we're seeing that has materialized here as well. Nestor, same thing, continuing to climb, is now going for 1 billion ISK for the sellers, 940 million for the buyers. Yeah, and then a year ago this cost less than 500,000, so that's a 100% increase in price. Nightmare, well, same story, peaked out to 1.25 billion ISK. I think we're seeing a little bit more volatility here because nightmares are used in Nosec fleets as well. So yeah, this is basically super expensive, currently going for 1 billion ISK again for the sellers. And we get the Balgorn, a little bit less, I think, PvP oriented at the moment, but also very specific in where you can get the blueprints. And so you've got this immediate March jump, calculating those are the changes, that's what it's going to cost us, going from 400 million to above 600, 650 for the sellers, 610 for the buyers. And then the Rattlesnake, right here in March, still had a dip to less than 600 million ISK and is currently going for 900 million ISK, so a 50% increase. And then finally we get the Vindicator that also just took a couple of steps up and is now going for above 1 billion. Buyers at 930 million. So these pirate faction battleships have become a lot more expensive. I'm really happy that I've got these rattlesnakes. I think I've got 3 of them at this point in my base of operations, and that I was actually gifted that Marauder, of course, for the Kaldari base of operations, where we'll do mostly missions when I get there. We still have the Navy faction battleships to look through. I'm kind of interested in the Thunderchild myself because I've finished training for this. I think I've got level 5 in the battleship skill. What is it called? Yeah, Edencom battleship. I think I've got that to 5 just like last week, I think. And it is, well, expensive, but 800 million for the sellers, 700 million for the buyers, 860 for most sellers. Let's be honest with that one. Honestly, for a Thunderchild, that, and considering the price of these pirate faction battleships, that's not too outlandish, so that feels like it could be something to look into. Then we get the Apocalypse Navy issue going for above 600 million ISK. Here we're getting back into the more classical story, right? Starts here at 400 million, ends at 600. You get a slow increase here because of the mineral changes, and then of course we get the industry changes that have just pushed us to that new range. 650 for the sellers and almost 600 million for the buyers, 50% increase. Armageddon Navy issue, a little bit more volatility. Is that PvP related? Let me know in the comments if you're still sticking around. But this one actually has now peaks up to 700 million ISK, but still low ends at 500 million. So 670 for the sellers, 520 for the buyers. That's a huge spread for the Armageddon Navy issue. Definitely a little bit of lack of availability. Kind of a weird one. Then we get the Dominic's Navy issue, you know, that step up here in March as well on the announcement. Starts here at 500 million, currently selling for 627. That's a little bit more decent, 500 million for the buyers. Megatron Navy issue definitely has that premium, but yeah, going again from 500 to 600 million. Raven Navy issue, a little bit more PvE ship, I would say. So 500 million at the start and currently selling for 750 million. That's a 50% increase. Scorpion Navy issue, man, that's very interesting. Like a November spike up to 700 million and then just flat there throughout all of these changes. So probably just because it's such a small market. Yeah, probably because it's a tiny market. But yeah, 800 million almost for a Scorpion Navy issue. Tempest Fleet issue. Here is the mineral trend, and then here the established plateau with the industry changes, a 50% increase to 600, and then the Typhoon Fleet issue currently going for 700 million ISK, 1 year high point at 730 in fact. And yeah, starts at 400 million here again. So for these Navy faction battleships, I would say their affordability has gone up throughout all of these changes, because Tech 1 battleships have become very expensive and very difficult to make all of a sudden. The pirate faction battleships, we see those, you know, 1 billion ISK is nothing special anymore for a pirate faction battleships, but quite a few of these Navy faction battleships have gained like 50% and are still at like the 500-600 million ISK range if you're setting up a buy order, and that's far more reasonable. So that's definitely pretty interesting, and you're also quickly seeing that the PvE ones like the Raven Navy issue do come on that premium, I think because of their special popularity. This potentially is a good mission ship in and of itself. So those are interesting changes, but I think this really does confirm that battleships have basically become like a big tier up, and I think that has just increased the popularity of Tech 2 ships, which explains why stuff like the Morphite keeps making 1-year high points, despite the fact that we're at the moment actually seeing a little bit of lower activity and less industry in general. But yeah, Tech 2 becoming super popular because of all of this. I think that's what's happening there. Anyways, that's it for this Eve Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.